All right, let's go. Number 10.
The mandrake.
In 1929, botanist M. Grieve finished cataloging over 800 medicinal plants across recorded human history and arrived at a conclusion that stopped her cold. One root, not opium, not hemlock, not nightshade, had touched more civilizations, more surgeries, more executions, and more rituals than anything else she had found. One root that most people today would walk past without a second glance. The mandrake. It looks like nothing. Low to the ground, dark, waxy leaves fanned out like a bruise against the soil, small, pale flowers that smell faintly sweet, the kind you'd find forgettable. But reach into the earth and pull, and what comes up doesn't look like a plant. It looks like a person. A thick, forked root, sometimes 2 feet long, shaped with unnerving precision into a torso, 2 legs, sometimes fingers, sometimes a face twisted mid-scream. The ancients didn't call it the man plant as poetry. They called it that because when they dug it up, they couldn't convince themselves it wasn't alive. The Greek physician Dioscorides, a man who spent his career cutting open the world to see what it was made of, identified exactly what was inside. Hyoscyamine, the compound in your modern motion sickness patch, and the same one used in emergency rooms today when a heart seizes and won't restart. Scopolamine, which at low doses produces a dissociation so complete, so seamless, that the person living through it forms no memories at all. The compound the CIA quietly weaponized as an interrogation drug 2,000 years later, calling it a truth serum. And atropine, which floods the pupils open, fractures vision into halos, and at the wrong dose, shuts the lungs down without warning. One root, all 3. The difference between medicine and murder was a question of grams. Arab surgeons in the 10th century understood the arithmetic. They soaked cloth in mandrake extract and pressed it to a patient's face before cutting into the body, achieving complete unconsciousness 14 centuries before the Western world coined the word anesthesia, before chloroform, before ether, before any of it. The line they walked was precise and unforgiving. Too little, and the patient came back to consciousness mid-incision. Too much, and they simply didn't come back. But that was the science. The science was the easy part. What the mandrake did to the human imagination was something surgery couldn't explain. From Rome through the Dark Ages and deep into the medieval period, across cultures that had never spoken to each other, the same belief surfaced in the same form. The mandrake screamed when you uprooted it. Not metaphorically, literally. A sound described in texts as high and inhuman, something between a child's cry and the sound of tearing meat. And anyone who heard it, anyone who was standing close enough when that scream came out of the ground, died. Immediately. Without exception. This was not a campfire story. This was written into medical guides, herbalist manuals, legal documents. Serious men recorded it as established fact. And so a ritual developed. Everywhere. Simultaneously. In cultures with no contact with one another, the solution was identical. You never pulled the mandrake yourself. You cleared the earth around the root at twilight. You tied one end of a rope around it. You tied the other end to a dog, always described as hungry, expendable, chosen. You packed wax or wool deep into your own ears until the world went silent. You walked away without looking back. The dog lunged forward. The root tore free. The scream came. You felt nothing. The dog dropped. You returned in the dark and collected what was yours, stepping around what wasn't anymore. No other plant in human history generated this. A universal, cross-cultural animal sacrifice. A creature that had to die so the healer could heal. A scream the earth made when you took something from it that it wanted to keep. They were afraid of it. Across 1,000 years and a dozen civilizations, they used it anyway. That's the part no one talks about. Not that they believed it would kill, that they believed it and still sent the dog in first.
Number 9, the kaikion, a cloudy foaming drink served in a clay cup. That's it. That is the object at the center of the greatest unsolved mystery in Western civilization. And the most remarkable thing about it isn't what was in it. It's that 2,000 years of people who drank it took the answer to their graves. Every single one of them. In the small coastal town of Eleusis, 14 miles from Athens, a ritual ran without interruption for nearly 2,000 years. From 1500 BCE to 400 CE, every autumn, the most powerful and educated people in the ancient world walked a sacred road through the night, fasted for 9 days, and descended into torchlit underground chambers beneath a hall called the Telesterion. There, in the dark beneath the earth, someone placed a clay vessel in their hands. It was cloudy. It foamed. They drank. And then something happened that none of them ever wrote down. The known ingredients are almost insultingly simple: barley, water, mint. The kind of thing a Greek farmer stirred together at the end of a hard day in the field. By every measure, this should have been a meal, not a revelation. It should have been forgotten, not protected for 2,000 years under penalty of death. Plato was an initiate. Aristotle was an initiate. Cicero wrote that Athens had given the world many great things, but nothing greater than the mysteries, which he said taught him not just how to live, but how to die. Aeschylus, Sophocles, Marcus Aurelius, Plutarch. The list reads like the index of every foundational text Western civilization was built on. And across 2,000 years, across hundreds of thousands of initiates, not one broke. The penalty was death, but the silence ran deeper than any fear of execution. These were people who wrote about everything, and they chose, across 80 consecutive generations, to say nothing. The barley is where the modern reconstruction fractures into something genuinely disturbing. In 1978, Albert Hofmann, the chemist who first synthesized LSD, co-authored a paper proposing that kaikion's active ingredient was ergot, specifically Claviceps purpurea, a fungus that grows naturally on Mediterranean barley and contains lysergic acid compounds. The priests of Eleusis, a closed hereditary class managing this ritual across 1,000 years, may have known precisely which strains produced visions and which ones produced gangrene. They may have understood how to extract the psychoactive alkaloids while leaving the toxic ones behind. If Hoffman was right, the Eleusinian priesthood had been administering a controlled psychedelic to the intellectual elite of the ancient world for 50 generations, before any modern laboratory understood such a molecule could even exist. But here's where the story stops being a mystery and becomes something stranger. We cannot test it. We will never test it. The Telesterion was raised by the Visigoths in 396 CE. The priesthood was dissolved by imperial Christian decree. The barley cultivars, the extraction method, the dosage, the timing within the 9-day fast, every variable that might answer the question, vanished with the last initiate who swore the oath. What makes the silence haunting is how surgical it is. We know what was sacrificed at Delphi. We know what was sung at the Panathenaic festival. We know what Athenians ate for dinner on feast days. But the one experience that Plato, Cicero, and Marcus Aurelius all described as the most important event of their inner lives, sits behind a wall that 80 generations refused to cross. They told us the drink was cloudy. They told us it foamed. They told us it was consumed underground in darkness by torchlight. And then they stopped. Completely. Permanently. The barley fields around Eleusis still grow. Claviceps purpurea still blooms on Mediterranean grain every autumn. The underground chambers beneath the Telesterion still exist, still sealed, still dark. The entire Western world's understanding of death, the soul, and what it means to be human was built on top of whatever happened inside those chambers. An experience we can no longer access, reconstruct, or test. The foundations of Western philosophy may rest on a recipe that was deliberately, perfectly, and irretrievably destroyed. What was poured into those clay cups and what it did to the people who drank it is the most successful secret ever kept. Number 8. San Pedro. In 1972, archaeologist Richard Berger of Yale University documented a stone carving on the walls of the Chavin de Huantar temple complex in the Peruvian highlands. The carving depicted a fanged supernatural being, a deity with interlocking serpentine features, gripping a tall, ribbed, columnar cactus. It had been carved around 1300 BCE. The cactus was unmistakable. It was Echinopsis pachanoi, San Pedro. The implication, when traced through subsequent excavations of stone bowls still bearing cactus residue, is that the Chavin cult, the earliest organized religious tradition in the Americas, had built an entire ceremonial architecture around it, 2,000 years before the Inca Empire existed. Echinopsis pachinoi grows on the dry slopes of the Andes between 6,000 and 10,000 feet elevation. It is tall, ribbed, and almost entirely spineless, unusual among cacti. Over decades, it reaches 10 to 20 feet. Its flower blooms only at night, white, enormous, the size of dinner plates, opening after dark and wilting before noon, as if the plant itself operates on a schedule that avoids daylight. The cactus is patient. It requires almost no water, grows slowly, and contains within it mescaline, one of the most structurally complex psychoactive alkaloids found in any plant on Earth. Its mescaline concentration runs lower than peyote. The Chavin priests compensated with labor. To prepare a single ceremonial dose, they stripped sections of cactus down to the alkaloid-dense green flesh beneath the skin, sliced it into discs, and boiled it in water for 7 hours or more, often far longer, reducing it down repeatedly until what remained was a thick, bitter, mucilaginous slurry, the color of cold moss, with a texture somewhere between soup and paste. A single dose required at least 1 full meter of cactus. 1 meter of San Pedro takes up to 15 years to grow. The experience that preparation produced was unlike any other psychoactive substance in the archaeological or ethnobotanical record. It did not arrive quickly. Onset took an hour or more, not a door opening, but a tide coming in. It did not produce the disorientation of ayahuasca or the compressed intensity of psilocybin. It accumulated, colors shifted first, then physical boundaries softened, then, at peak, something that participants across cultures and centuries described not as vision or hallucination, but as a quality of knowing, arrived, settled, and did not leave. 12 hours minimum. Ayahuasca lasts 4 to 6. Psilocybin runs 6 hours at its outer edge. San Pedro runs to the next noon. It is not the most intense natural psychedelic documented. It is the most durable, a marathon with no rapid descent, no sudden exit. Once it reaches peak, it holds. The Chavin's ceremonial complex appears to have been engineered as an instrument for exactly this duration. Initiates entered the underground galleries, narrow labyrinths carved directly into bedrock rise at dusk. They consumed the preparation in complete darkness. The galleries were not incidentally dark. Ventilation shafts had been carefully engineered to deliver cold air drafts into the ritual chambers. A deliberate physical element added to darkness and disorientation. Acoustic chambers amplified and distorted sound in ways that would have been indistinguishable, at peak mescaline, from internal experience. They remained underground through the entire night and into the following day. More than 12 uninterrupted hours inside a purpose-built sensory environment, while the longest-acting natural psychedelic ever documented worked through its full arc. By the time initiates emerged, whatever the Chavin priests had choreographed, cosmology, law, the structure of the world, the nature of the deity on the wall, had 12 hours of total sensory and psychological control in which to take hold. The Chavin cult spread across the central Andes. Its iconography reached the sites across a geographic range larger than Western Europe. It predated the Inca by 2,000 years. And then the knowledge dissolved. We have the temple. We have the stone bowls with residue still identifiable. We have the ventilation shafts, and the acoustic chambers, and the labyrinthine corridors. We have Echinopsis pachinoi, still growing on Andean slopes at the same elevations, still taking 15 years to produce a single ceremonial meter. What we do not have is doctrine. What was spoken inside those galleries, what the 12 hours were designed to mean, what question the entire system was engineered to answer, what the initiates experienced, what the priests transmitted during that unbroken altered state, what the architecture and the cold air and the darkness were built to reveal, is gone. San Pedro remains. The ceremony does not. What is striking is not that they used a psychoactive plant. It is that they built a temple patient enough to deserve one. Number 7, ergot. In 1938, inside a pharmaceutical lab in Basel, Switzerland, a chemist named Albert Hofmann was doing something spectacularly ordinary. He was analyzing compounds extracted from a parasitic fungus that grows on rye. The goal was modest: find something useful for blood pressure. His 25th synthesis, a molecule he labeled LSD-25, showed nothing interesting. He shelved it and moved on. 5 years later, he accidentally absorbed a trace amount through his fingertips. That afternoon, cycling home through the streets of Basel, the world began to dissolve. Colors bled into each other, the walls breathed. Time folded in on itself. He had not invented a new experience. He had only extracted something that had been sitting inside a small black fungus for longer than recorded history. The source is Claviceps purpurea, a parasitic fungus that colonizes the seed heads of rye, wheat, and barley. Instead of grain, it produces a dense, dark, purplish-black mass called a sclerotium. To any farmer walking his field, it looked like bad grain. Spoiled. Throw it out. But to anyone who ate it unknowingly, the consequences range from a slow, agonizing death to something that could only be described by the people it happened to as seeing God. The numbers are difficult to compile because for most of history, no one knew what they were dealing with. The outbreaks known as St. Anthony's Fire swept through medieval Europe in waves, killing thousands at a time. The disease came in two forms. The gangrenous form cut off blood supply to the extremities. Fingers and toes turned black, dried out, and fell away from living bodies painlessly, while the person was still walking around. The convulsive form produced seizures, hallucinations, and a particular kind of madness that made entire villages believe they were being attacked by invisible forces. In 944 AD, a single outbreak in France killed 40,000 people. In 1039, an epidemic in a single province left thousands dead. In 1722, Peter the Great's cavalry, assembled and ready to march against the Ottoman Empire, was destroyed in a single night. The soldiers had eaten ergot-contaminated grain. The campaign never happened. History turned on a fungus. And through every one of these catastrophes, not a single person understood why. They blamed witchcraft. They blamed sin. They built shrines. But here's where the standard explanation falls apart. In 1978, a classic scholar named Carl Ruck at Boston University, working alongside mycologist R. Gordon Wasson and, remarkably, Albert Hofmann himself, proposed something that permanently altered how we understand the origins of Western thought. The Eleusinian Mysteries, the most sacred religious rite in ancient Greece, conducted without interruption for 2,000 years at the city of Eleusis, may have been powered by ergot. The initiates drank a preparation called kykeon, brewed from barley. That barley grew in fields where Claviceps purpurea grows naturally. The fungus carries the same psychoactive alkaloids that Hofmann isolated in 1938. The implications do not resolve neatly. Plato was initiated at Eleusis, so was Sophocles, Cicero, Pindar, Epictetus, the men who built the intellectual architecture that still runs underneath every university, every court, every philosophical argument you have ever had. All of them sat in that hall and drank that cup. The roster of Western civilization's foundational minds who passed through Eleusis reads like a list of everyone who built the world you were born into. Aristotle was almost certainly among them. Whatever they experienced, they were forbidden under penalty of death to describe it. The silence held for 2,000 years. In some ways it still holds. What we know is this: initiates emerged transformed. Cicero wrote that at Eleusis he had learnt not merely how to live, but how to die with hope. Pindar wrote of a man who has seen that beginning, who knows the end of life, and knows too its Zeus-given start. These were not the words of men describing allegory. They were describing something they had directly felt. The mechanism is biochemically plausible. Ergot contains not only the toxic alkaloids responsible for the mass deaths of medieval Europe, but also lysergic acid derivatives that remain psychoactive after the gangrenous compounds are carefully removed. The priestly clan at Eleusis, the Eumolpidae, who guarded their preparation for over a millennium, may have possessed exactly this knowledge, not faith. Pharmacology. The expertise was not lost to doubt. It was lost when Emperor Theodosius forcibly shut down the mysteries in 392 AD and torched what remained. Claviceps purpurea still grows in rye fields today. The same black, shriveled mass that every farmer should throw away still produces the same compound Hofmann isolated in a Swiss lab, the same compound that may have shaped the thinking of everyone who built the civilization you inherited. The fungus did not change, only our understanding of what it had been doing to us. For how long, and to whom? Number 6. Henbane. In 1992, inside a 3,000-year-old grave in Germany, archaeologists pulled something out of the burial soil that had no business surviving 3 millennia underground. Seeds. Dozens of them, small, kidney-shaped, pressed against the bones of a woman who had been dead since the Bronze Age. They belonged to Hyoscyamus niger, henbane, and someone, 30 centuries ago, considered them important enough to bury with the dead. The reason becomes clear the moment you understand what those seeds contain. Henbane produces scopolamine, hyoscyamine, and atropine. These are not mild sedatives, they are deliriants. And there is a clinical distinction here that matters. A psychedelic distorts reality. A deliriant abolishes it. The user does not see visions layered over the world. The user enters a separate world, indistinguishable from waking life, populated by people who aren't there, conversations that never happened, and rooms that don't exist. Memory of the experience is fragmentary or gone entirely, and the dose that produces these effects sits perilously close to the dose that stops the heart. The plant itself looks like a warning. Pale, sticky, coated in gray hairs that trap insects. Its smell is heavy and medicinal, rotting and wrong, something the body registers before the mind has time to name it. Nothing about henbane invites consumption, and yet, across 4,000 years and every continent where it grows, humans consumed it anyway. Vikings may have carried it into battle. A burial site at Firkat in Denmark, dated to around 980 CE, contained the grave of Osiris and a pouch of henbane seeds beside her. Some researchers have linked the plant to the berserker tradition, warriors who fought in states of dissociated frenzy, feeling no pain, unrecognizing friend from foe, moving through combat as though the normal rules of the world did not apply to them. The pharmacology fits. Scopolamine at the right dose produces aggression, hallucination, grandiosity, and complete suppression of the fear response. The connection is contested. The chemistry does not rule it out. The oracle at Delphi presents a similar puzzle. The Pythia, the prophesying priestess, entered states of what ancient sources called divine possession, convulsing and speaking in fragments that priests interpreted as messages from Apollo. Geologists have confirmed the chamber beneath the temple sits above a fault line, releasing volatile compounds. Some scholars argue the ritual incense may have contained henbane. The ancient sources are too fragmentary to confirm it. The chemistry is consistent enough that scholars cannot rule it out. But here is where henbane's history crosses from the strange into something stranger still. In medieval Europe, the 4 centuries between roughly 1300 and 1700, henbane became the central ingredient in what the historical record calls witch ointment. Recipes recorded in physicians' manuals and inquisitors' handbooks describe a preparation of henbane, belladonna, and hemlock, rendered into a fat-based paste, applied to the skin, to the mucous membranes. The accused women reported the same experience with extraordinary consistency, across trials separated by decades and entire countries. They had flown. They had traveled through the night sky to gatherings where they danced and feasted and returned to their bodies before dawn. They were not describing dreams. They were certain they had been there physically. A modern pharmacologist hears something else entirely. Scopolamine absorbed transdermally and through the skin, through the mucous membranes, produces exactly this. The vivid kinesthetic hallucination of flight, wind, altitude, the body moving through space, the sensation of arriving somewhere entirely real. These women were not lying. They were not speaking metaphorically. Within the chemistry of Hyoscyamus niger, they had genuinely flown. The broomstick, in the most disturbing reading of the folklore, was not a vehicle. It was the applicator. The most efficient method of transdermal absorption was exactly what the records suggest, and what inquisitors recorded with revulsion and did not understand. The implications don't stay contained. The entire architecture of witch mythology, the night flight, the Sabbath, the congress with supernatural figures, and the transformation into animals, may not be a cultural construction built from misogyny and theological anxiety. It may be the documented pharmacological signature of a single plant, experienced consistently by thousands of people across 2 centuries, then interpreted by a culture that had no framework to understand what its own accused had genuinely discovered. And the truly unsettling part is that this knowledge was old when the witch trials even began. The Firkat burial predates them by 700 years. The Bronze Age grave in Germany predates them by nearly 2,500. Someone in the ancient world already understood what henbane did to the human mind, and considered that knowledge important enough to carry into death. Henbane did not need to be discovered in medieval Europe. It had been waiting since before written language. Pale, sticky, foul-smelling, and patient, holding within its seeds a chemistry that could lift the body from the ground without ever moving it at all. It still grows wild across Europe, Asia, and North America today. The margin between the dose that makes you fly and the dose that kills you has not changed at all. Number 5. The Blue Lotus. The ancient Egyptians got high before every major ritual, and they used a flower to do it. In 1922, Howard Carter broke the seal on Tutankhamun's tomb and found something that stopped him cold. Not the gold mask, not the weapons, not the 4,000-year-old food still sitting in jars. Scattered directly on the body of a dead teenage king were blue flower petals, fresh enough to still hold color, placed there deliberately by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. That flower was Nymphaea caerulea, the blue lotus, the same one carved on every temple wall, painted on every sarcophagus, held in the hands of every god in every major Egyptian illustration for 3,000 years straight. It appears so often that Egyptologists called it decorative, a repeated motif, background pattern, filler. They were wrong. The blue lotus contains 2 psychoactive compounds. Apomorphine, the same chemical modern medicine now uses to treat Parkinson's disease, is a direct dopamine agonist. It floods the brain's reward system with precision. The second compound, nuciferine, is a sedative alkaloid that produces euphoria, full-body relaxation, and a state scientists describe as conscious dreaming. Awake but deeply altered, aware but untethered. Together they don't make you hallucinate. They don't make you black out. They do something far more specific. They dissolve the wall between the waking mind and the dream state completely. For hours, the Egyptians didn't eat the petals. They steeped them in wine, sometimes for days, because nuciferine is fat-soluble, meaning it binds to alcohol, meaning a single cup delivered the full psychoactive payload. This wasn't accidental folk medicine. This was pharmaceutical precision developed across centuries of observation. The wine was consumed by priests before entering the inner sanctum, by pharaohs before major rituals, by initiates before their first encounter with the gods. It was not recreational, it was the door. The lotus is everywhere in Egyptian theology because to them it was theology. When they depicted the moment of creation, they painted a blue lotus surfacing from the dark primordial ocean. When they depicted the sun god Ra at the moment of first light, the most sacred moment in the Egyptian cosmological calendar, they painted him rising from an open lotus. When they depicted resurrection itself, the soul escaping death, they painted the lotus, not holding a lotus, being a lotus. Here is why. The blue lotus grows in murky water. Its roots sit in silt and decay. Its stem drives straight up through the dark. Every single morning, at the exact moment of sunrise, it opens. Every evening, it closes and submerges. After 3 days, it disappears entirely, then returns, clean and unblemished. To a civilization that believed death was not an ending, but a threshold, this flower wasn't symbolizing resurrection. It was demonstrating it, publicly, every day, in the Nile in front of them. The same lotus appears in Egypt's erotic art, held toward a lover, breathed in before intimacy, carved into fertility temples where scholars spent a century labeling it purely decorative. Modern neuroscience now knows why it appeared there too. Apomorphine, the dopamine agonist in the lotus, is today being tested as a treatment for sexual dysfunction. The Egyptians had no concept of dopamine receptors, but they had 4,000 years of careful human observation, and they had mapped every single effect of this flower with more accuracy than most modern herbalists manage in a lifetime. Then there is the boy in the tomb, Tutankhamun, 19 years old, dead under circumstances still debated. Someone, a priest, a parent, a grieving official, placed blue lotus petals on his wrapped body before sealing him in the dark. They believed those petals would carry him through the underworld and back into the light. Whether that was ritual protocol, pharmacological belief, or simply the most sacred thing a grieving person could reach for, it was not careless, it was the most intentional act they knew. The blue lotus still grows in the Nile. It still opens at sunrise and closes at dusk. The exact preparation, the ratios, the soaking time, the specific rituals that unlocked its full effect, died with the priests who kept it. The most powerful psychoactive ceremony in human history, and nobody wrote down the recipe. Number 4. Yopo snuff. In 1979, archaeologists excavating a rock shelter in the Puna de Atacama recovered a burial kit, sealed inside a woven pouch. Inside, 2 hollow bird bone tubes, a carved wooden spatula, a shallow stone tray, and a compacted residue of organic powder still sitting in the tray's bowl, undisturbed for over 2,000 years. Radiocarbon dating placed the kit at approximately 2,130 years old. The residue tested positive for bufotenine and dimethyltryptamine. This was not a medicine bag. This was precision equipment buried with its owner, designed to do exactly one thing: to unmake the ordinary human mind. The substance is called yopo. In some Amazonian traditions, jojoba is used, Among the Yanomami ebenae, the name shifts, the mechanism does not. Yopo is produced from the seeds of Anadenanthera peregrina, a tree native to the savannas of Venezuela, Colombia, Brazil, and the Caribbean basin, unremarkable to look at and catastrophic in its chemistry. The seeds are extracted, dried, and slow roasted over coals until the shell blackens and splits. The inner seed is ground to powder, blended with alkaline ash from burnt freshwater snail shells or calcified tree bark and then left to cure. The resulting powder is gray-green, nearly weightless, and completely inert if swallowed. Stomach acid destroys both active compounds before they reach the brain. The body refuses entry. The powder contains bufotenine. It contains DMT. Both belong to the tryptamine class. Molecules structurally identical to the compounds your brain uses to construct baseline reality. Both produce total dissolution of perceived identity when they reach the bloodstream, and both are pharmacologically useless by any conventional route of administration. For thousands of years, humans who found these seeds faced the same locked door. They solved it in a way that is difficult to absorb even now. They did not smoke the powder. They did not brew it. They carved bifurcated tubes from the long bones of birds. 2 channels joined at a single mouthpiece, loaded one end with powder, placed the forked end against the nostrils of another human being, and blew. Hard. A single percussive breath from one person's lungs directly into the skull of someone sitting across from them. That person had agreed to receive it. That agreement was the ceremony. The delivery is not slow. The violence of entry is architecturally essential. Within 3 seconds, the alkaloids breach the nasal mucosa and enter the bloodstream faster than any digestive process allows. Burning erupts backward through the skull. The eyes flood. The throat closes. Vomiting arrives without warning, documented across 5 centuries of Spanish missionary records, 18th century naturalist journals, and 20th century anthropological fieldwork, and as expected, is unremarkable and ignored. Then convulsions, then stillness, then the eyes go somewhere no one else in the room can follow. What followed that stillness is recorded with eerie consistency across cultures separated by thousands of miles. Visions of cosmic architecture, contact with ancestors, conversations with entities the practitioners identified as the structural intelligence of the forest itself. Jesuit missionaries in the 17th century documented Yanomami shamans returning from the ceremony with accurate knowledge of events occurring in distant villages. The missionaries recorded it and moved on. They had no framework for what they had witnessed. The geographic spread of Yopo use is impossible to dismiss. Snuffing tubes and carved stone trays have been recovered from burial sites across Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, Chile, and the Caribbean islands, an unbroken corridor exceeding 3,000 miles. The 2,130-year-old Atacama kit is the oldest confirmed artifact. It is almost certainly not the oldest use. What makes Yopo something beyond a dangerous ritual is the social architecture it required. This cannot be self-administered. The bifurcated tube makes solo use physically impossible. The ceremony demands 2 people, one to surrender entirely and one to hold the space for what follows. The person receiving must trust the person blowing with a completeness that has no modern equivalent. They are surrendering muscular control, sensory coherence, and the continuous narrative of self. The cultures that built this were not primitive. They were operating within cosmological frameworks of documented sophistication. The Yopo ceremony was not an escape. It was a technology. The tube was an instrument. The shaman was a technician working at the outermost edge of what human neurology permits. Modern pharmacology can synthesize DMT at 99.9% purity. It cannot reconstruct the preparation logic, the precise ash ratio, the specific snail species, the curing duration that determines activation versus tissue damage. That knowledge was oral. Much of it died in the demographic collapse after 1492, untransmitted, simply gone. Somewhere in the deep past, someone figured it out. We do not know how. Number 3, ayahuasca. In 1976, a botanical survey team moving through the Peruvian Amazon near the Ucayali River collected soil samples from the base of a collapsed ceremonial structure. Decades later, in 2010, researchers at the University of Melbourne ran those preserved samples through high-performance liquid chromatography. The results stopped the lab: harmine, harmaline, dimethyltryptamine, the molecular fingerprint of a prepared psychoactive brew. Not the raw plants, but the finished compound was embedded in earth that was carbon dated to approximately 900 CE. Someone had been cooking ayahuasca at that site for so long that the ground itself had absorbed the chemistry. That compound, or something pharmacologically identical to it, had been in deliberate ceremonial use somewhere in the western Amazon for at least 12 centuries before a single Western scientist knew it existed. Ayahuasca is not a drink. It is an accident that should never have happened, and somehow always does. The preparation requires two completely unrelated plants, growing wild across a jungle the size of the continental United States, to be identified, harvested, and cooked together in a specific sequence. The first is Banisteriopsis caapi, a vine that can grow to the thickness of a human thigh, climbing the forest canopy for 30 meters. The second is Psychotria viridis, an unremarkable shrub with waxy dark green leaves. Separately, they are nothing. B. caapi does not intoxicate. P. viridis, consumed alone in any quantity, produces no effect whatsoever. Here's why that second fact is extraordinary. P. viridis leaves are saturated with dimethyltryptamine, DMT, one of the most powerful psychedelic molecules ever identified. It binds to serotonin receptors in the human brain with extraordinary affinity. It should, by every pharmacological expectation, be violently active. But the human gut produces monoamine oxidase in enormous quantities, an enzyme whose entire function is to destroy molecules exactly like DMT before they reach the bloodstream. You could consume P. viridis leaves by the handful. Nothing would happen. The body dismantles the compound faster than it can accumulate. The door exists. It is simply locked from the inside. B. caapi carries the key. The vine contains 3 beta-carboline alkaloids, harmine, harmaline, and tetrahydroharmine, which are among the most selective monoamine oxidase inhibitors found anywhere in the natural world. When consumed alongside DMT, they silence the gut enzyme completely. The destruction mechanism shuts down. DMT survives digestion, enters the bloodstream intact, crosses the blood-brain barrier, and reaches its receptors. Boil these two plants together for 6 to 12 hours, strain the liquid, and the result is a dark reddish-brown brew that performs a feat of targeted neurochemistry that most pharmaceutical researchers would consider elegant if they encountered it in a laboratory. They did not discover it first. The Amazon rainforest contains between 80,000 and 100,000 documented plant species. Estimates of total species, including undocumented ones, exceed 400,000. The probability of randomly pairing B. caapi with P. viridis from that field of candidates, and then discovering that one chemically neutralizes a metabolic defense system that the other requires bypassed through a mechanism that produces no visible, tasteable, or smellable signal at the moment of combination, is not small. It is not even calculable in any meaningful sense. It is the kind of probability that, when you write it out, stops looking like a number. And this is the part that genuinely unsettles the researchers who spend careers studying it. The people who developed this preparation had no concept of monoamine oxidase. They had no framework for alkaloid chemistry. They had no microscopes, no titration equipment, no ability to observe any part of the reaction they were producing at the molecular level. What they had was the jungle and time and a knowledge tradition that, when pressed on the question of origins, gives an answer that Western science has never found satisfying and has never been able to replace. The plants told us. The vine showed the way. Plant teachers. In the Shipibo tradition, the word for this category of knowledge is not discovery. It is closer to what was given. The ceremony itself takes place after dark. The curandero, the practitioner, has typically trained for a minimum of 10 years, often far longer, living in isolation, fasting, and following strict dietary protocols called dieta that restrict not just food, but social contact, sexual activity, and emotional engagement. The icaros, the medicine songs, are not composed. They are described as learnt directly from the plants during the practitioner's own training ceremonies. They are the operating instructions, transmitted across generations in the form of melody. They have been doing this since before the Inca Empire existed. What the chromatography found in that Peruvian soil, what the leather pouch in Bolivia confirmed, what every clinical trial at Johns Hopkins and NYU and Imperial College London continues to document, is that this preparation works with a precision that challenges the clean boundary between empirical knowledge and whatever it is we're calling the alternative. The chemistry is not disputed. The neurological effects are not disputed. The therapeutic results emerging from modern research are not disputed. What has never been adequately explained, and what the researchers who study it most carefully tend to go quiet about, is how anyone knew to make it in the first place. Number 2. Amanita muscaria. In the frozen taiga of Siberia, where temperatures collapse to -50 and the ground never fully thaws, the Evenki have been eating a poisonous mushroom in a ritual context for over 4,000 years. The Koryak did it, the Chukchi did it, the Sami people across the Scandinavian north did it. The practice repeats across thousands of miles and dozens of unconnected tribes, with variations so consistent they suggest an origin older than any written record can reach. The mushroom is unmistakable. It erupts from the soil in brilliant scarlet speckled with white dots, sometimes reaching 8 inches across, growing at the base of birch and pine trees in the boreal forests of the northern hemisphere. Every forager recognizes it instantly. It is the mushroom on the Mario Brothers power-up screen. It is the mushroom in every fairy tale illustration you have ever seen. It is Amanita muscaria, and for most of human history it was the most sacred object in the northern world. The chemistry is unlike anything else on the psychedelic spectrum. It does not contain psilocybin. It does not contain DMT. Its active agents are muscimol and ibotenic acid, compounds that do not act on serotonin receptors at all, but instead mimic GABA, the brain's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter, producing effects closer to dissociative anesthesia than to any classical psychedelic. The experience is not like psilocybin mushrooms or LSD. It is something stranger. Users describe visions of flying, a sensation that the body has grown enormous, objects shrinking and expanding without warning, and a dreamlike conviction of contact with non-human intelligences. The mushroom does not open the doors of perception. It convinces you the doors were never there. But here's where the practice becomes genuinely disturbing. Raw Amanita muscaria is toxic. Consumed without preparation, it produces nausea, convulsions, and involuntary muscle spasms. And in sufficient doses, it can stop the heart. The shamans understood this. They also understood something Western pharmacology would not formally describe until 1967, that the human body metabolizes ibotenic acid into muscimol, converting the most dangerous compound into the most psychoactive one during digestion. The vehicle for that conversion was reindeer urine. Reindeer actively seek Amanita muscaria, consuming it compulsively when they find it, and their metabolisms perform the same conversion, stripping the toxins and concentrating the muscimol. Observers recorded reindeer behaving erratically after consumption, stumbling through the snow, appearing to hallucinate, and occasionally staring at the empty sky. The shamans observed this. They built a ritual around it. The shaman consumed the raw mushroom and waited. The congregation collected his urine and drank it. The urine was then collected again, diluted, and passed further. A single mushroom could dose an entire village through this chain, each pass reducing toxicity while preserving potency. The system was elegant. The chemistry was brutal. What emerged was a controlled, scalable sacrament distilled through the human body itself. The implications extend further than the pharmacology. Picture the scene. It is midwinter in Siberia, the longest night of the year. A shaman dresses in red and white, the colors of the mushroom, to perform the ceremony. He carries a sack of dried amanita over his shoulder. The traditional Siberian yurt has its door sealed against the cold. He enters through the smoke hole in the roof. He moves from dwelling to dwelling across the village, delivering the sacrament. The reindeer, having eaten the mushroom, are agitated and wild-eyed, apparently flying across the snow in their frantic movement. A man in red and white, a sack of gifts. Flying reindeer, entering through the chimney, one night, a year, in the deep of winter. Ethnobotanists John Rush and Carl Ruck in the early 2000s proposed that the modern image of Santa Claus is a folk memory, unconsciously preserved, of the Siberian shamanic gift-giver. The theory is contested by historians. The parallels are difficult to dismiss. What makes this entry particularly unsettling is the precise cruelty of the survival. The costume persisted. The ritual did not. Every December, in shopping malls and children's books and front lawns across the world, a figure in red and white delivers gifts in the deep of winter, and no one asking for the origin of that image has any idea what they are actually looking at. The ritual has been forgotten. The costume remains. Amanita muscaria still grows at the base of birch trees across the northern hemisphere. The shamans who understood it are nearly all gone, and the knowledge they carried, accumulated across 40 centuries of surviving the coldest inhabited places on Earth, was never written down. Number 1. Soma. Around 1500 BCE, in the highland valley stretching across ancient Iran and northwestern India, a group of priests gathered before dawn. They had been preparing for 3 days. They crushed a plant, strained its juice through wool filters, chanted over it, and drank. What happened next, they described as becoming immortal. The name of that plant has not been known for 3,000 years. They called it soma. It appears 120 times in the Rig Veda, the oldest surviving religious text on earth. This was not a drink. This was the entire religion. Every major ritual in Vedic civilization orbited around it. The priests didn't pray to receive soma. They prepared soma so that the gods would come to them. The Rig Veda is precise enough to tell you the exact thread count of the wool used to filter it. It never once describes what the plant looked like. People who drank it didn't say they felt good. They said time stopped. They said they could see the seams of the universe. The Rig Veda claims the drinker touched something that ordinary human life simply cannot reach. Indra, the most powerful deity in the entire Vedic pantheon, the god who split mountains and killed cosmic serpents, needed soma before he could fight. Not wanted, needed. Without it, even the king of gods was just a king. Then the knowledge ended. Somewhere in the silent centuries between 1000 BCE and 500 BCE, the people who knew what soma was simply died. No dramatic burning of libraries. No conquering army erasing the records. The priests stopped knowing, one generation at a time, until there was no one left who remembered. Later traditions kept the rituals but substituted plants that everyone quietly understood were not the same thing. Scholars have been searching for 2 centuries. Ephedra grows in the right region but creates nothing close to the described effect. Amanita muscaria produces the right kind of experience but never grew where these people lived. Cannabis, Syrian rue, blue lotus, each theory arrives with evidence, and each theory leaves with fatal problems. Botanists, ethnobotanists, and Vedic scholars keep arriving at the same door and finding it locked. What haunts people about soma isn't the mystery itself. It's the shape of the absence. An entire civilization looked at one plant and said, "This is God. This is the thing we were looking for." They were so certain that they wrote 120 hymns about it, built rituals around it that lasted centuries, and told their children it was the most important thing in the world. And then they forgot what it was. The hymns remain. The rituals remain. The plant is gone.